The journalist who became a dreamer.
And Theodor Herzl has his aha moment.
And the idea that became a nation.
A beacon to humanity.
We begin our series, The Hope, the Rebirth of Israel.
I call it the Jiu-Jitsu move, where you take the negative and you turn it into something positive.
On today's 700 Club Interactive. Well, welcome to 700 Club Interactive. In AD 70, the Romans conquered Jerusalem, and the Jewish people were scattered throughout the world. But even in exile, they celebrated Passover each year with the prayer of hope. Next year in Jerusalem. Well, after more than 1,800 years, the dream of a Jewish homeland was stronger than ever. And in the late 19th century, a young writer from Vienna brought that dream to the attention of the world. In 1893, a Viennese journalist wrote, "When I think of my son's future, I ask myself whether I have the right to make life so difficult for him as it has become for me. That is why we must baptize Jewish children, while they can still feel nothing, either for it or against it. We Jews must submerge in the people."
In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti.
It's not something you'd expect to hear from the man known as the father of Zionism. But those words were written by Theodor Herzl, who spent his life trying to solve what he called the Jewish question. Herzl was born in Budapest in 1860. At the time, the city was known as Judapest because of its large Jewish population. As a boy, he attended a Christian high school that was open to Jews. And on his 13th birthday, his parents held a confirmation ceremony instead of a bar mitzvah.
Theodor Herzl was an assimilated Jew who came from an assimilated family. He was not educated in the Jewish sphere at all. He was very, very far from Judaism.
His family later moved to Vienna, where Herzl earned a law degree. But his real passion was writing, so he divided his time between writing plays, working as a reporter, and looking for a way to end anti-Semitism.
Theodor Herzl is the one who sort of pulls it together, but there are many. There are Christian ministers, there are rabbis, there are presidents, there are all kinds of people who are saying, wait a minute, we've got this problem.
At one point, Herzl even proposed a mass baptism of Jewish babies in Vienna's largest cathedral. He believed that if Jews adopted Christian culture, they would finally be accepted by European society. But Theodor Herzl was about to get an assignment that would change his mind.
It was as a journalist for the top newspaper in Vienna that he was sent to Paris to write about the wonderful French experience. Herzl, who was a bon vivant, and was living in Paris and enjoying himself and going to the theater 3 times a week, and all of a sudden, he saw the ugly face of anti-Semitism.
Herzl was assigned to cover the famous Dreyfus affair, in which a French Jewish captain was falsely convicted of spying for the Germans. Herzl watched as Alfred Dreyfus was stripped of his medals and publicly degraded at the military school in Paris. Crowds filled the streets, shouting death to the Jews.
People are inflamed, and they're shouting, not down with Dreyfus, not down with the individual, they shout down with the Jews. And Theodor Herzl has his aha moment.
Herzl realized that the only solution to anti-Semitism was for the Jews to have their own state.
Wonderful idea. How do you go about doing it? This is where the writer of plays came in, He was going to set the stage.
Herzl shut himself in his apartment and wrote his ideas down for 5 straight days. When a friend of his visited, he was alarmed by Herzl's disheveled appearance and wild ideas. He suggested they get some fresh air. And as they walked, he told Herzl to get some medical help before someone hauled him off to a madhouse. Herzl paid no attention, and the following year, he published his most famous work, The Jewish State.
Theodor Herzl, in his book, The Jewish State, dreams. And he talks about this new nation state being a beacon to humanity. He talks about it being a model democracy.
Not everyone was thrilled with Herzl's ideas. Religious Jews thought it was blasphemy to reestablish the nation of Israel without the Messiah. Nevertheless, Herzl worked tirelessly to realize his vision. He even tried to buy the land of Palestine.
He tried to create a situation where he will be introduced to the Sultan of Turkey, and he will buy the land of Israel from him. Boy, that's going to cost a lot of money. How is he going to pay for it? Well, he had the dream. He had an idea. He says, I'm going to take half of the riches of all the rich Jews. Well, of course, there was absolutely no chance that any of these people would do that. They did not want to see Zionism succeed, in fact. But he was convinced that that's the way to do it.
In 1897, Herzl gathered Jewish delegates from around the world for the first World Zionist Congress. For this historic meeting, he chose the city of Basel in Switzerland.
By the way, do you know why it was in Basel? It was supposed to be in Munich. And in Munich, there were Jews who called themselves Germans of the faith of Moses. And they said to him, we don't want this Jewish riffraff from all over the world coming to Munich.
In August, more than 200 delegates from 17 countries arrived in Basel. It was the first representative Jewish assembly in nearly 2,000 years, and the atmosphere was electric. Behind the podium hung a white flag with 2 blue stripes and a Star of David, a version of the design that would be adopted by the State of Israel 50 years later. Among the delegates was a man Herzl introduced as the first Christian Zionist. The Reverend William Heckler was the British embassy chaplain in Vienna. He was deeply interested in the return of the Jews to Israel, so he helped Herzl make some important political connections, and the two became lifelong friends. As Herzl walked to the podium, people cheered and stomped their feet. He opened the Congress by announcing, "We are here to lay the foundation stone of the house which is to shelter the Jewish nation." The applause was deafening. One English delegate described the excitement of the crowd. "By the rivers of Babylon, we sat down and wept as we remembered Zion. By the rivers of Basel, we sat down and resolved to weep no more."
The beautiful thing about Theodor Herzl and the beautiful thing about Zionism is that it doesn't just stop with the negative. There is anti-Semitism, and there is negativity, and there's a certain rejection on the part of Europe. But what they also do is, I call it the jujitsu move, where you take the negative and you turn it into something positive.
A few days later, Herzl made a bold statement in his diary.
At Basel, I founded the Jewish state. If I said this out loud today, I would be answered by universal laughter. Perhaps in 5 years, and certainly in 50, everyone will know it.
Herzl's statement turned out to be prophetic. 50 years later, the United Nations approved a plan to divide Palestine into Jewish and Arab states. And 9 months later, the State of Israel was born. After the Congress, Herzl, who had never been religious, started observing some Jewish traditions. That winter, instead of having a Christmas tree, the Herzl family celebrated their first Hanukkah. Despite growing health problems, Herzl traveled the globe, trying to get backers for the new state. He went first to Constantinople, then on to Jerusalem in hopes of asking the Ottoman Sultan for land. Then in the spring of 1903, the need for a Jewish state became more urgent than ever, as the world turned its focus on a small town in Russia. On Easter Sunday, a group of Russian Orthodox men entered the Jewish quarter of the village of Kishinev. Led by their priest, they shouted, "Death to the Jews." The same cry Herzl had heard in Paris during the Dreyfus affair almost 10 years earlier. Eyewitnesses described the bloody massacre that followed. Wives, along with their husbands, were shot down. A synagogue worker was killed protecting the Torah with his body. Children had their brains dashed out against the walls. And even babes were snatched from the arms of pleading mothers and hurled through windows. At sunset, the streets were piled with corpses. After 3 days, more than 40 Jews were killed, 92 were injured, and more than 700 homes were looted and destroyed. Four months later, the Jewish Congress convened under the shadow of the massacre, but that was just the beginning. Herzl had good news and bad news for the crowd. The good news was that Great Britain wanted to help the Jewish people. The bad news was how they wanted to help. After the Kishinev pogrom, Herzl had an emergency meeting with British politicians. He asked them for land in Cyprus or the Sinai Peninsula, both of which were under British control. The plan was to rescue the Jews from Russia and still be close to Palestine. The British refused and offered them land in British East Africa, now Uganda. With no other choice, Herzl accepted the offer, and the British drew up a plan for a colony they called New Palestine. In 1903, Herzl presented the idea to the Zionist Congress with disastrous results.
Zionism refers to Zion, and the plan was eventually to have Zion as the homeland. Nobody was giving this up. But for now, we're going to get ourselves a place to hide.
It was the delegates from Russia, whom Herzl was trying to protect, who took the news the hardest. They stormed out of the concert hall in protest. Among them was a young man who would become the first president of the new state of Israel, Chaim Weizmann.
The Zionists from Russia hated the idea. So they basically mounted a revolution against him and broke his heart, and he had been dealt such a tremendous shock that everybody doesn't take his word for the gospel truth.
Herzl closed the Sixth Zionist Congress by raising his right hand and reciting a verse from the Psalms. "If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill." These were the last words he would ever speak at the podium in Basel. Only his close friends and family knew that he was suffering from heart failure. And over the next year, his health declined rapidly. He told his old friend, Reverend Heckler, "Greet Palestine for me. I gave my heart's blood for my people." He died the next day. And at his funeral in Vienna, more than 6,000 people gathered to honor the man they had called King of the Jews. In 1949, the new government of Israel honored Herzl's dying request. They brought his remains from Vienna and reburied them here, on a hill overlooking Jerusalem. During his lifetime, Herzl was called everything from a hero to a dreamer to a heretic. But his influence on the Jewish people is undeniable. In the last decade of his life, he gave them something they hadn't had in nearly 2,000 years, the hope of going home.
He was an amazing man. He deserves a lot of credit. He had a dream, and it was a good dream. But you know, there's a distance between dreaming and between bringing something to fruition. It took pioneers, it took men of action, men of work. Herzl was, in the words of that wonderful song, the wind beneath their wings.
Tomorrow we'll continue this with the people who were the pioneers, who did go in to repurchase the land. And it's an incredible story of perseverance against all odds. Then we'll continue on the following day with wonderful stories about Chaim Weizmann, who you met today, and then David Ben-Gurion, Golda Meir, Winston Churchill, the major players in the rebirth of Israel. Herzl's story is just the first of many you'll be seeing over the next few days, all about the founding of the State of Israel, the hope, the rebirth of Israel. If you miss an episode or you want to see a story again, all you have to do is go to 700clubinteractive.com. They'll be there on a wonderful page for the hope, and you can watch all of them as we release them. You can watch them again online. We also have a special offer for you if you want to get copies of this series on DVD. We have both DVD and Blu-ray, your choice. You get to choose which one you want. What we're asking for is a donation of $10 to cover our costs in shipping it to you. If you want to get multiple copies, there's a place online where you can do that. So if you want to get a copy of the DVD, call us. 888-777-1999 is the phone number. There's also a place on 700clubinteractive.com where if you're on the page for the Hope, you can click on the link and go directly to the order page. Do it now. Call us, 888-777-1999, if you'd like to get a copy of either the Blu-ray or the DVD. Well, up next, an author goes undercover and learns what's fueling the flames of anti-Semitism. Why does it seem like there can never be peace between Israel and the Palestinians? Well, a new book blames some of the trouble on people outside the Middle East, fueling the hatred between the two. John Waggy brings us this look at the frightening influence of these European and American groups.
Anti-Semitism is alive and well in Europe, with attacks in France and Austria doubling since 2013. This year has been marked by attacks at a kosher supermarket in Paris and shootings of Jews in Copenhagen. The new book, Catch the Jew, has been a #1 bestseller in Israel. It claims Europeans are fanning the flames of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict by exporting that anti-Semitism to the Middle East.
There is not only Jews and Arabs here, the way I thought, fighting it out. There is another tribe here, and the tribe is called Europeans. Some Americans, but mostly Europeans.
Author Tuvia Tenenbaum says European governments back organizations that claim to help Palestinians, but their true goal is to create friction and chaos.
In reality, they have come to this land to implant and instill hatred in the heart of every Muslim against the Jews, and also sponsor self-hating Jews to catch the Jew doing something wrong, to declare the Jew evil, and to end the story of the Jews being here.
Behind me is an Israeli checkpoint. It marks the crossing between Israeli and Palestinian areas, and European groups send monitors here. They're hoping to catch Israeli soldiers doing something Europeans don't like. For 6 months, Tenenbaum and his wife Miriam interviewed hundreds of Israeli Jews and Arabs, Palestinians, and foreign aid workers asking about their jobs and beliefs. Paid by a German newspaper, Tenenbaum posed as a German and hid his Jewish identity. In the eyes of Palestinians and internationals alike, being German, they thought, made him a kindred spirit in the hatred of the Jews.
This is Bedouin land, we shall not be moved.
He captured many examples on video, like this Palestinian, Atef, a top researcher for the pro-Palestinian Israeli human rights group B'Tselem. The group documents alleged Israeli brutality against Palestinians. Atef says the Holocaust never happened.
Because we're Germans, we support the Jews. But ask him if he remembers that we also killed them.
It's a lie. I don't believe.
You don't believe it?
Tenenbaum challenged B'Tselem.
I want you to retract the reports that he signed on. How can you believe a guy, how can you trust a guy whose research has found that there was no Holocaust?
Another example involves Casa per la Pace Milano, House for Peace, a group backed by the European Commission. It brings young Italians here for what it calls peace education to see firsthand the situation in Israel and Palestinian areas. Yet some of that education comes from tour guide Itamar Shapira, who describes himself as an ex-Jew and speaks against Israel. During a tour at the Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial, he compares Israelis to Nazis.
This one is a very known massacre that happened here in 48 war. It's called Bir Yassin. It used to be a Palestinian village below these houses and trees, a Palestinian village of a few thousand people, and about 170, 120, 400, again a fight of the numbers of Palestinians were killed over there.
The museum fired Shapira as a guide, but he continues to conduct private tours. Tenenbaum's German connection also gave him access to Palestinian leaders like former security chief Jibril Rajoub, considered a Palestinian moderate. He told Tenenbaum that even Hitler didn't know how bad the Jews are.
Yeah, my question to you was, do you think the Israelis have changed?
Excuse me, let them not to change. Let them not to change. Israel will be isolated. Israel will be more than South Africa.
Hanan Ashrawi is a Christian Palestinian, yet she wouldn't talk about the existence of a Jewish temple here. Her former boss, Yasser Arafat, said the Jews never lived here.
Of course, no, the Jewish tribes were here, but they weren't, a state the way they claim it to be.
So not a state.
And I don't.
Was there
I believe there was.
Was there a temple there?
Judea, Samaria, or whatever. I have no idea. I'm not an archaeologist.
Tenenbaum doesn't blame the Arabs. He lays the guilt squarely on the Europeans who pay them. Tenenbaum, whose grandfather was murdered by the Nazis, has this message for the Jews.
I don't want you to die. I don't want you to disappear. Fight back. And be brave about it.
John Wagi, CBN News, at the Adarot checkpoint near Jerusalem.
You can't understand the history, the current headlines, without understanding the history. How did the Jewish state come to be? That's why we want to get the information to you. So if you want to order copies of The Hope, you can do so now. Just call us, 888-777-1999. While some Israelis and tourists head to the Mount of Olives, others have trouble making it to the grocery store. Ephraim Bronston survived the Holocaust, and today he receives help from CBN Israel.
Ephraim Bronstein was only 1 year old when the Holocaust began. He doesn't remember much about it, but his relatives tell him he's lucky to be alive. In 1941, his family was forced to live in a ghetto in their native Ukraine. Then, his father was sent to war to fight for Germany, while his mother was forced to do hard labor. While his mom worked, he was kept safe by an 11-year-old girl.
She hid me inside a bag so that the Germans wouldn't take us while our parents were away.
Life in the ghetto was harsh.
All we had to eat was rotten beets. Sometimes the Germans forced me to clean the street. Every day they shot people who lived in the ghetto. They took some away to the guest chambers.
There was little protection from the bitter cold. Lack of food and warmth made Ephraim sick, and he never recovered.
I have hypertension, I have diabetes, and I have heart problems.
Today, living in Israel, his life is still difficult. Ephraim lives in poverty, like many Holocaust survivors. So CBN Israel gives Ephraim food baskets each month. He looks forward to every delivery because he needs the food and enjoys the time spent with volunteers.
I like when people visit former ghetto prisoners like me. We are lonely and don't get much attention.
Ephraim's stove was broken and he couldn't afford to fix it. So we took him shopping, bought him a new stove, and delivered it to his home. And we got him a microwave too.
I want to say thank you for coming and bringing me such a wonderful gift. Thank you very much.
If you want to help people in Israel, if you want to help Holocaust survivors, if you want to help Muslims on the West Bank, if you want to help Christians who are living in Jerusalem, if you want to help people who don't believe any of that but still have a need, we have something for you. It's called CBN Israel. It's a designated fund where your gift goes to help people in Israel. It also goes to our news bureau to help report stories from Israel, as well as these wonderful documentaries we're doing. So if you want to give to that, to help people, be a blessing to them, you just write to us, CBN Israel, CBN Center, Virginia Beach, Virginia, 23463. Put CBN Israel on the memo line on a check, or you can go to our website, 700clubinteractive.com, and when you click on the giving page, there'll be a place there where you can designate your gift, and 100% of it will go to CBN Israel. Be a part of it. Be involved. 1-888-777-1999 is the number to call. Do it now. We leave you with this verse from Psalms 121, verse of inspiration. I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow.